Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 104, recorded on February 26, 2021. It is the 53rd recorded conversation with my friend Mike. It turned out that our earlier conclusion that we were in agreement about the meaning of belief was incorrect, as we specifically could not agree on whether beliefs existed that were inactive. Hi, Mike. Good
Hey,
seeing
Bill. Good to see you.
you too.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you could hear me. Okay, are we recording?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think that we made significant progress last time, if memory serves, with regards to coming to an agreement regarding beliefs. Is that your recollection as well?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that during this discussion, we had talked about, I had proposed moving the conversation into some of the inferences I make, or not necessarily I make, but some of the inferences I could propose given the definition of belief that I have. And so we're going to be talking about, I propose talking about two things today. The idea of the intrinsic versus relative with regards to existence of something. So given the definition of belief that we have and we agreed to last time, can we say that an entity, regardless of what it is, has any intrinsic existence in and of itself, or is that entity's existence simply completely relative depending upon who is believing in certain attributes of that entity? So if I believe something about an entity and you believe something different about the entity, and someone else believes something different about the entity, can we say that the entity we believe in has any intrinsic existence outside of what these people believe in it? Do you follow me? So it was a little complicated and confusing,
Yes,
I guess.
yes,
Do you follow what I'm saying, though?
Yes.
Do you think we're ready to talk about that, or do you want to go to something else?
No, we can do this.
Okay.
But it goes back.
My guess, yeah, go ahead.
It goes
It
back.
goes back.
It goes back to that original thing where I was maintaining that there was evidence for the existence of reality independent of one's subjective experience, and that demonstrated that there was, namely the ability to predict. And then I realized I had to change that. It did involve some circular reasoning, so to speak.
Mhm.
in that uh, the, my basic assumption uh, was of that nature. Um, but the it probably also involves what do we mean by um, uh, well, what do we mean by intrinsic or no, that's not.
Right.
Anyway, let me let you respond and see what we've got.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. Uh, and for anybody watching, I just want to let everybody know that you have Bill and I haven't gotten in, haven't talked for a while. Bill and I have both had a very rough few weeks, and my mind is not able to concentrate and focus that well. So I'm having a bit of a difficult time with memory and remembering uh, what I said last time and what happened. So in lieu of that, let me answer Bill's questions. So if I seem a little out of it, a little slower, I apologize. Um, so yeah, I agree that the question is, what do I mean by intrinsic and what do I mean by relative? But I think what I mean by, let's take intrinsic to start with. What I mean by intrinsic has to do with exactly the question I proposed. So intrinsic means is, can we say that an entity has some type of existence or definition outside of various persons' belief, independent of what people believe? That's really what I mean by intrinsic. So if something has an intrinsic existence to it or intrinsic attribute, that attribute would exist independently of anyone's belief in it. That's what I mean by intrinsic. I have a feeling you're going to say absolutely. An entity has intrinsic existence outside of what anybody believes in it.
No, no, I think it's more complex than that. There are several problems
Mm-hmm.
involved. Um, uh, the you use the word definition. Um, Along with something else, and I can't bring it to mind. Uh, but those two things seem different. I mean, I believe are
Um, I remember. Yes, I used the word um, belief versus. It was define. Define was the wrong word. I shouldn't. It was. I used the word define and belief. Um, is that what you're referring to? Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly what I said.
Yeah, well, now I couldn't understand that. So,
Okay.
uh, but uh, but basically, um, it seems that the question is is connected to: do you believe that you're the only one that exists?
How so is it connected to that? So if what I'm proposing is it does an entity have intrinsic existence, or does an entity have an attribute? Here's a good way to. Does an entity have an attribute that exists outside of what people believe? So one way of looking at this, you could say, I know this is going to sound like the silly philosophy conundrums, but or like even like a Zen koan, like I'm sitting in a white car now. Okay, is that car has an attribute of being white? Does that whiteness, does the car being white have any meaning if there's no humans or in existence to believe that the car is white?
I think I understand basically what the issue is. It has to do with, it goes back to it. Does anything exist, quote, outside of, i.e., is not included in one's subjective experience?
I would agree. It goes back to that. And I don't necessarily believe that there's not, or there is something outside subjective experience. I kind of lean towards more the idea that it is. But I think where I sit, it's at least very questionable. I think I subscribe to the idea that the only thing I can be absolutely sure of, are the things that I'm experiencing in this moment within my subjective experience. Now, I may come to realize that what I'm experiencing in my subjective experience is what I believed about it was wrong. But if I'm hallucinating and I'm seeing, a flying pig in front of me, I cannot doubt that I am seeing a flying pig in front of me. I may then say, wait a minute, I'm seeing a flying pig, but I know that can't happen, so I must be hallucinating. But it definitely speaks to the idea that I can only be sure of that which is in my subjective experience. I can only make inferences and deduce what's outside of it, but I can't know it directly.
Well, first, the when you speak of the only thing you can be sure of is your subjective experience, I think you're referring to, as we've talked about in the past, the experience itself or the beliefs about that experience. And
Correct. Right.
so you are given the subjective experience, whatever that is, but then there are beliefs about it, and there's one that is very closely automatically produced by subjective experience, and that is the belief that that is actually happening, that is actually the way things are, and um, and that can be incorrect, as in the example of the hallucination.
Right, absolutely. Both with regards to whether an attribute intrinsically exists without that belief in its existence, I think is at least a reasonable possibility to consider. Would you agree?
Say it again.
I think I think I would agree with everything you just said, regarding you being given a subjective experience, and then you have beliefs about it, and that belief, to a certain degree, is within your control to decide whether you believe in it or not. But the subjective experience itself is simply given to you. You have no choice but to experience it. I would agree with all that, and I think that I believe that worldview leads to a certain inference that I believe could be considered a reasonable possibility. And that reasonable possibility is that an entity has no intrinsic attribute outside of what a person believes. So intrinsic means the car is white independently of what anybody believes about it. So if all humans were wiped off in the face of the universe, all sentient conscious beings everywhere, they just wiped out in this thought experiment, would the car still be white? Would this collection of plastic and metal still be a car? One of the ways of thinking about this that I heard recently, go ahead.
Well, I think the problem is that what we're talking about, definition is something that is created by us. An entity is by definition XYZ. Okay, so that definition is our creation.
Okay.
The associated idea, though, is whether uh, uh, your statement that all human beings, the postulate that all human beings got ceased to exist, is related to whether you believe there are other human beings with subjective experience, and that already implies that that there are things outside of one's own subjective experience.
That's an interesting point. All right, so let me see. Let me better understand your response to that. So, okay, I don't understand the connection between. I'm not understand. I think I see what you're saying, which is an interesting point. If I am asking, does subjective experience have any existence outside of what we believe about it? I think that your argument would be appropriate and applicable because you're absolutely right.
I didn't follow that.
Well, I think that I don't think what I'm proposing about the car. Help me to understand how what I'm proposing about the car's attributes being independent of someone's beliefs about them, and if you wiped out all people, would would the car have any intrinsic attribute to it? So my question is, how does that depend on the belief that other people exist? Let's say I was the only person on the planet, in the universe, and I went away. The question would still be valid. If I'm the only person in the universe and everyone else is my imagination, and I go away, does the car have any attribute to it outside of my beliefs? So I don't think it is necessary to assume that my argument depends upon the belief in the existence of other subjective experiences, because the same thing would apply if it was just one subjective experience. It was just me.
I was just using that as an example. Um,
That's an interesting example, though. That's an interesting rebuttal.
well, suppose there's the question, first and foremost, if your subjective existence, no, if your subjective experience were to completely go away, would there be anything in existence?
That's a good question. I think that could be a good postulate that's another potential inference. So now I guess it would depend. My answer to that would be, it depends what point of view you answer the question by.
Okay, so you can say that, well, you can have one worldview or a different worldview. One worldview is that all that exists is your subjective experience, and the other that no, there's a world that exists, and your subjective experience is just a model to some extent of certain parts of it.
So I think I think I hear what you're saying with regards to this is that it could be yes, no, or maybe. The question as regards to does anything exist? Yeah, absolutely right. Does anything can if you go away, can you say that anything exists? So let's say I go away, and I think I see what you're saying. What you're saying is it depends on what your worldview is. If I have the worldview that there are things, I think if I'm hearing it correctly, if you have the worldview that there is existence of things independent of and attributes of what you believe in and what you're aware of, then when I go away, those things continue to exist. But if you have the worldview of something different, is that what you're saying?
Didn't follow that.
So I guess what I'm asking you is, are you saying that the existence of an attribute when I go away depends upon what your worldview is? Is that what you're saying?
I think we're talking about one's basic worldview, and that the normal one is that yeah, I'm just one among many, and when I go, the others will still be there, and that's people and things. Um, but another worldview, a solipsistic worldview, would be that no, if I go away, everything's gone, nothing exists, and I think that that's an atypical worldview and is not very helpful.
When you say things go away, um, I think it's important to be
When
more specific. What do you mean by things go away?
uh, uh, I don't know because I don't remember my sentence.
um, you said if
I don't remember saying when things go away.
when it's if I go away, um, you also said, if you have a solipsistic point of view, you believe that when you go away, everything else goes away. And you said that was an atypical view, and most people believe that when they go away, that things still exist. I think it's important for you to help me to understand what you mean by go away. If I die and I have a solipsistic point of view, or I forget that I take anesthesia and I'm not conscious. When you say from a solipsistic point of view things go away, what do you mean by that? Do you mean things go away in some type of uh, meaning things go away outside of my subjective experience, or do things stop existing within my subjective experience?
Well, I'm talking about the the difference in worldview between the solipsistic one and the more normal one, I would say. Um, that if you if you believe that all that exists is your subjective experience, then if your subjective experience ceases to exist, everything ceases to exist by definition.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, to me, that seems like a reasonable consideration.
It does.
Yes, and I know to you it does not at all.
Right.
Um, if the existence of something when I go away depends upon what I believe in it, what I believe, my worldview, my beliefs. And as we agreed about that last time,
I'm sorry, say it again.
that if the existence of something when I am gone depends on my worldview.
No.
So, so if we got to think what you said before. If I'm solipsistic and I believe that when I'm under anesthesia, nothing exists, then you had said, well, then that is going to be your experience. That's what you're going to be, what you believe. To a certain extent, that's what's going to be happening to you. That's what you believe is happening.
I'm not following that, and to a certain extent, and so on. That
Okay.
doesn't
If
say.
if I guess the salient point I'm trying to make is that if I'm for the solipsist, when they go to sleep at night or when they are put in under anesthesia, they believe that everything stops existing while they're asleep. Let's say you have that belief. And let's say you take someone who's not a solipsist, who believes that when I go to sleep, well, of course, everything keeps moving on, and then I wake up and I kind of rejoin what's already been happening when I was asleep. Okay. it seems to me that both of those situations, the solipsist and the non-solipsist, depends upon their belief. And my argument is as follows. A belief is part of one's subjective experience.
Well,
and that's an important consideration.
Yeah, that's right. I can't. I can't get a hold of this. There's some. There's my basic understanding of what you and I mean about our terms and so on, and but then something seems to go wrong. Um, so the basic um, the basic difference in worldview between myself and the solipsist, which may or may not be you, um, um, is that uh, uh, many things exist. I am one of them. My subjective experience exists. If for some reason I no longer have subjective experience, I quote die or whatever, then there is a world going on uh, uh, independent of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is connected to the belief I'm not the only person in the world. And just because I'm not thinking about something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And but the solipsistic position would be that there is only one thing in existence, and that is one's subjective experience. That that there's only one person and only one experience that that person is having, and so forth. And so that so that that which exists either continues to exist or ceases to exist. In other words, subjective experience no longer occurs.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit definition. Let's go with your definition of solipsism. But I still think as atypical, uncomfortable, counterintuitive, or whatever, the idea is, as regards to when my subjective experience goes away, it's questionable about whether things still exist, is nonetheless a reasonable possibility. It's possible. I'm just, that's just all I'm saying. I'm saying it that it is, there is, and look, I'm also aware that just because something is reasonable doesn't mean it's right. But I'm just talking about the idea, is it reasonable?
Well, what do you mean reasonable?
What I mean by reasonable is that, is it a possibility? Is it a cogent argument to say that it is possible?
See, we introduce, we try to pin down one point, all of a sudden another word or to appear. And so it's kind of like agreement is always running from us, and it's manifested in this appearance of new words.
Okay, so I guess it was cogent that was the offending word.
Yeah.
Okay, so reasonable. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.
What? Let's go back to reasonable. What does that mean? Um, what what I
Because
would
I don't know. Maybe
what I
go
would
ahead.
mean would be that with the uh, that it would seem whatever we would be talking about would be um, a possible conclusion using um, using our reason, our logic, and rules of evidence, and so on. In other words, that one can be unreasonable also, and so that's my thought
Yes,
about that.
I would agree. I would agree. That is I would agree with your definition of reasonable. So I think it's reasonable to consider the possibility, and I guess it's that um, when my subjective experience goes away, to question whether or not things exist. And I think we have to get a little bit more specific about what we mean when we say, do things exist? Do entities exist when my subjective experience goes away? In my opinion, is not a specific enough statement and proposition. And it also, and we've talked about this before, it is exemplary of a point of view, and you've heard me talk about this before, that has never, will never, or at the moment does not exist. And that point of view is a point of view that is outside of somebody's subjective experience. When you say, do things exist when my subjective experience goes away, you are considering existence from a point of view that is outside of my subjective experience, that is outside of yours, that is outside of everybody's. It's this point of view that would be the equivalent, let's say, of somebody seeing all the humans on the planet, seeing all the entities on the planet, and seeing if it exists or not when all the humans go away. Not possible. That's never, can never, will never. It's just impossible. The only experience anybody ever has is their first person subjective experience. Anything other than that is their imagination. So when you are considering that point of view of existing, do things exist when I go away or when all humans go away, you are imagining a fantastical state of experience that you are, let me get more specific, you are imagining a subjective experience that has never happened, does never happen, or will never happen in the history of the universe by definition.
Not that at all. I don't. One can know that there are other things than oneself without knowing what all those things are.
Yes, the salient point in what I was saying is not the need to know everything. The I could make an example Let me take a more simple example. There's two people, and I'll take this from the book, and we talked about this before. There are two people looking at a house. And in this picture, to describe what's happening, you see the house, you see two people, and then you see these bubbles that go over like the old cartoons, and you see what each person is thinking in their heads. The point of view that such a cartoon takes, I would argue, is no human on the face of the earth ever, in the past, present, or future, will ever have that point of view. It's completely your imagination. The point of view where I can experience, I can watch two other people's subjective experience while they're looking at a house does not exist. That can exist in my imagination. I can imagine such a state, but that has nothing to do with the actual subjective experience of a person. The subjective experience of the person is always what's inside of that bubble. So when you say a person goes away and does the house still exist when that person goes away? In order for you to even answer and consider such a question, you have to adopt the point of view of that cartoon, which is your imagination. You have to consider the house and the person's subjective experience of that house as two separate entities from a third person point of view. It's like you're taking the camera and you're seeing their subjective experience and the entity that they're experiencing. And my argument against that is that point of view is impossible to exist.
Well,
and that's very important.
the cartoon was just a metaphor to clarify something, and it can always be overextended. Um,
Of course.
it was
But I think it is being overextended.
The idea was that assuming that there are people and that they may be looking at a house, uh, the what each person sees is going to be somewhat different just by virtue of perspective. And so whatever they see, uh, what is to them the house is actually their own model of that which exists in reality. That's the only point it's making. I mean, you can take any such metaphor and then
Right.
start uh, extending it and uh, using it where it doesn't apply and so forth. So it was just a
Right.
limited sort of thing that was trying to clarify that
Right.
whatever your subjective experience, uh, whatever's when you are looking at something, what you are seeing is a model of something that exists in reality, but your experience is only a model of it. It's a little difficult concept to get. We assume that if we look at a house, that's it right there, and so on. But it's not exactly that way. But
Right.
that's supposed to be meaning, not you can extend it and make it
Right.
seem, make it um, not be very useful or reasonable.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. And I did not mean to inappropriately apply or criticize the cartoon. I was just using it as an analogy to try to highlight what I mean by when I say a third person point of view.
Mhm.
To consider whether or not, I guess we can continue with the cartoon, to consider and portray someone's subjective experience as being a model for something. You are, by explaining it in the way that cartoon does, by showing the two people and the house from this point of view that can only exist in somebody's imagination, what you're doing there is you are implicitly, without an argument or evidence, presupposing that what you just said is true, that there is a reality outside of their subjective experience.
Right.
Right. So I think it's okay and very appropriate to do that if one acknowledges that that presupposition and that assumption is based on a personal belief.
Yeah, it's we have our fundamental worldviews, and I don't think we can get away from them. Um,
Mhm.
People experiment with different uh, fundamental worldviews like solipsism and so on, but in real life, so to speak, uh, uh, it's that, there are many of us. I'm just one person, and there's a world that exists, and I just happen to be in it at this particular time. And
Well, but I think a corollary to that is just what you said about your cartoon. That you had said, um, usually when people see the house, they just say to themselves, "Well, that's the house." What they're not thinking very routinely is that what they are seeing is simply a model of something that exists in
uh,
reality. So
uh,
even though most people walk around with a certain worldview, doesn't necessarily mean that uh, that worldview is in any way accurate. And you demonstrated that in the argument in the cartoon. So I could say, something similar, or, you could say, well, in the same way, Bill's, your cartoon presupposes and shows you a picture of that what you're really seeing is simply a model of something that exists in reality. A cartoon could be drawn such that you could assume the exact opposite, that there is no reality outside of what's happening in your head. And both people looking at both cartoons would say to themselves, well, I don't see, my worldview is not either in my daily living. And I think both you and I would say to them, I understand that, but that has no bearing on whether or not your worldview is actually accurate. You follow what I'm saying? Little?
worldview is accurate. That's problematic. I uh, I think we're stuck, and uh, uh, I'm not sure where it goes wrong. I did ask you previously, do you believe that you're the only person that exists? And I don't believe that you gave me an answer. Uh,
Well, because it's a trick question. It presupposes that it presupposes one definition for existence, and that is existence means something outside of your subjective experience. That's why I object to the question. If you would give me, if I could be afforded the flexibility to, or if we could maybe define a little bit more what existence means, which we've tried to in the past, then that's something that I I could consider answering.
yeah, well, and so we've done that I think a fair number of times in the past also. Um, the word exist has different meanings depending upon the context, how it's being used. Um, uh, to say um, my uh, my refrigerator exists is a little bit different from saying um, uh, government exists, or um, democracy exists, or well, just there'd be any number of different things. Um, Contradiction. Does contradiction exist? And the word exist is going to have to mean different things uh, depending upon how it's being used.
Could you explain the differences in the word existence between some different things that you just said or any others? So how is it different when you say the refrigerator exists or you say the government exists? Can you explain how those are two different things in definition of the word existence?
Well, the criterion or criteria for being used for whether something meets the uh, uh, meets the definition of uh, being in existence. I don't think that uh, became unclear, I believe. Um, the problem is, uh, okay, we could elucidate the problem perhaps by uh, asking what is the definition of the word exist? Can you answer that?
Um, Without looking at the dictionary, I'm not going to look at the dictionary. But I'm going to say that for me, Existence and belief are tied together.
Oh, what? Well, that,
let me finish, but I'm working through it as I'm talking. The word existence and belief are tied together in an important way and dependent upon each other. I think probably the most accurate definition of existence
exist, not existence.
of exist, something that exists.
No, oh,
It's something that, what do you mean by exist?
no.
Something that exists, is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Okay. Is probably a belief. I'd like to, let's look at this a little bit more specifically. A belief that I have, or that somebody has, that an entity that they are, that I guess that they are experiencing. The most accurate definition is probably the belief that somebody has that they are experiencing an entity. Is probably the best definition I could say of exist. So if I'm sitting in the car.
Say it again, please.
So if I'm sitting in the car.
No, please say it again.
Oh, the definition? The most accurate definition that I believe could be used for the word existence.
Exist.
Exists. That the word exists, that something exists, is a belief that somebody has that they are experiencing the entity. So I think the car exists.
So you think that a person experiences democracy, experiences contradiction, experiences.
Correct. I can imagine.
But the definition is supposed to be an agreed upon usage of a word. That the way you can tell that we are using the same word is we're using the same definition.
That's not what I took. But when you said what is a definition of exist, that's not what I thought you were asking. So if you're asking me what is a definition of exist, meaning, and by definition you mean how it's colloquially used, then yeah, and then that's easy. Then just look it up in a dictionary.
Well, the problem is that okay, then
I would agree with you. I mean, exist as it's colloquially used has.
wait,
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitions, colloquial definitions, would be ways in which the word is used, spelled out. And what you're suggesting is that, oh, well, there's a different definition, and it's
Well,
but it's an agreed upon usage of a word, how the word will be used.
Yes, we talked about this before. You know, I'm a firm believer in, I think it's called the appeal to dictionary logical fallacy. that when you look up a word in a dictionary, all it refers to is how most people are using the word, not what it has nothing to do with accuracy of the definition. It just simply has to do with how most people are using the word. Like, for example, when I look up the word exist in the dictionary, I see it says have objective reality or being. And objective reality, objective experience, we have already agreed upon, questioning whether that has any meaning. That subjective experience is a one-term word. There is nothing called objective experience.
Right.
Right. So just because a dictionary says something doesn't necessarily, and it's colloquially used in common, has nothing to do with its accuracy. So when you asked me, to define exist, I thought you were asking me to define it in the most accurate way I knew how to. But it seems to me now what you're asking me is to define exist as it's commonly used. And if you're asking me to do that, I would agree with you. Exist as it's commonly used refers to the objective existence of a thing, that the thing, an entity exists outside or independent of my subjective experience. I would agree with you. That is how it's commonly used.
Well, you're proposing yet another definition.
Well,
You're using the word accurate, which goes along with a belief, not a definition.
well, I think all definitions go along with some belief. When I see a definition in the dictionary, I have to believe in that definition. And if enough people believe in that definition, then the people who write the dictionaries write down that definition. If enough people would kind of, adopt my definition of exist, maybe the dictionary that came out in the year 2100 would say something different.
Okay, so you are proposing a new definition for the word exist.
I guess what I'm proposing is that when you are considering, and this is for more than just exist, when we are considering questions like these in very technical and specific and detailed terms, colloquial definitions sometimes, and very oftentimes, in fact, are not appropriate. And more specific definitions need to be considered.
Well, words, starting in infancy, are used very ambiguously and so forth, and gradually assume meaning. And then we humans, and then a further development is the much more specific use of words, such that they have very clearly defined meanings. And that's technical language as opposed to normal or poetic language.
Right. And so exactly, that's very true. I've seen you do this, and I agree with you doing this many times. That is why very often when you are at meetup groups and people start using words as poetry as they are colloquially used, you say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean by truth? What do you mean by exist? What do you mean by believe? And it's very appropriate. And I think what I'm doing now with regards to the definition of exist is kind of similar. I'm saying, wait a minute, you're using the colloquial definition of exist. And I think given the technicality and the level of detail and the questions we are considering, that colloquial definition does not suffice. Do you think that's reasonable?
I'm not sure. Uh, I I might be saying that there's uh, that when we talk about these things that exist, one's refrigerator, democracy, contradiction, uh, awareness, and so forth. Um, uh, to apply the same word exist uh, to all of them, and that same uh, word have a precise definition that does not vary might be an impossible task. Um,
How so?
well, because the the things that we use the word exist with, uh, the words that we, uh, the, the the entities that we talk about existing and so on, are of such different nature that having a meaningful uh, common definition may be um,
Right.
possible.
Right. Well, then that brings up the possibility that definitions should be appropriate to the discussion at hand.
Yes.
So if a single if that is accepted and you and I agree with that, and I think we do, then I think it's still reasonable for me to present what I would consider to be a more appropriate definition for the word exist that is not colloquial, but yet is more appropriate to the subject we're talking about.
I'm sorry.
If it's true that definitions should be used that are appropriate to the subjects at hand and the discussion at hand, rather than a universally agreed upon definition, then I claim it is appropriate for us to reconsider and use a definition for the word exist that is more appropriate to the discussion we're having right now, and that we should not be using the colloquial definition of exist.
I'm sorry, I'm stuck. um,
Don't be sorry, it's fine.
the It seems to me like
Do you want to pause the recording for a minute? Oh, okay.
no, no, everything's fine.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Uh, uh, let's see. There may be a good way of defining exist that would uh, be an accurate definition, no matter which thing we were talking about existing, such as the car, the uh, uh, the nation, the government, um,
Okay.
the contradiction, et cetera, all of these different things. But I don't know what that would be.
Um, do you have any issue? It sounds like you have concerns with the definition I proposed.
I, I'm sorry, but I don't remember the definition you're proposing.
It's okay, because when I said that, I said to myself, wait a minute. If Bill doesn't remember, that means like I'm going to have to repeat it. And I don't even know if I remember it, but let me try.
Well,
My definition of
wait,
exist was,
wait, wait. Um, I think when I asked you, I'm not sure that this is where it occurred, but when I asked you, you didn't give an answer, and you said the reason was it was a trick question. So so I don't
right.
know.
So well, I had followed up with that, and I had said something. I said as a trick question with regards to does something exist when you're not experiencing it? But you asked me something else. You said, please define exist. For
Uh-huh.
something to exist, what does that mean? And I did give a definition for that.
Okay.
More specifically, the definition I gave,
Uh-huh.
right, the definition I gave for that was, I believe the most accurate way of describing to exist would be somebody that believes they are experiencing the entity. That could be, that's very important because that also covers hallucinations.
Wait,
So let's say,
I couldn't follow that at
okay,
all. So can you maybe tell me again? Try
when
not,
somebody says,
well, wait, try to not surround uh, the definition by a lot of other things. Uh, the definition of exist is,
okay,
can you answer that?
yeah,
Uh,
exist, to exist means a belief that a person has that they are experiencing an entity.
that seems totally uh, uh, totally way out. Uh, uh,
Well,
anything
I
to
think it's more, I think it's,
doesn't have anything to do with experiencing. Um,
I would say it does. How so? How does it not have anything to do with experiencing?
Well, are there things that we um, are there things that we
Okay, I see what you're saying, actually. I see what you're saying by that. You're right. Okay. Um, 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 you see that they can, I guess we have to go into now what what do you mean by experience? So Mike, uh, let me ask you a question. I'm a schizophrenic. Let me do a thought experiment with you. I'm a schizophrenic and I see a pig, a flying pig in front of me. Can I say that the flying pig exists?
I would disagree with you.
Wow. How so? I said, can I say, the person who's a schizophrenic, can this person who's a schizophrenic say the flying pig exists?
It depends on what they mean. If the person had enough insight to realize they were experiencing an hallucination, they would say that, well, my experiencing of the flying pig exists, but the flying pig does not exist.
Yes, but that's a possibility. But what if the person did not have that um, that mindset? I mean, what if they were in a psychotic episode and they saw a flying pig?
What is
Or if they saw,
what is a
is it reasonable for them to say the flying pig exists?
what is a psychotic episode?
If they're in the midst of um, a schizoid break, where they are hallucinating and they don't have the state of mind to realize what's happening to them.
What does it mean to hallucinate?
To hallucinate, well, really, to hallucinate means you are aware that you are seeing something that's not true, and that's my whole point.
No, no. Hallucinations are very often not recognized as being hallucinations.
Well, the word hallucination means, I and that exactly is my point. But the word hallucination refers to something that someone experiences that is not that other people would not be considered to be real. That's what a hallucination means. I mean, it's so, but that's my very point. A person who is having a hallucination that doesn't know they're hallucinating, that is no different than me seeing the car. Or let me ask, how is it different?
In what way?
What do you mean, in what way?
Different in what way?
Is there anything different? Is there anything different between my subjective experience and the schizophrenic subjective experience of seeing the flying pig?
We would say that the experience was the same, but um, the beliefs about the experience would be different.
Oh, okay. So this is really important. So the accuracy of someone's subjective experience.
Now, wait.
Go ahead.
Accurate, um, you're applying the word accuracy to subjective experience. That may be problematic, but uh, maybe I should not have interrupted. The question, there's a difference in my mind between subjective experience and belief. And if,
Fascinating. How so?
well, we've been talking about that for a couple of years.
Okay, all right. So let me see if I understand. Subjective experience is simply your at any moment in time, your sensations, your thoughts, your feelings, your motivational states. You do not include belief as part of subjective experience. I thought we went over that last time, but you would not, is what you're saying.
No,
Is that true?
I would say that uh, the awareness of a belief would be a part of subjective experience.
Hmm. The awareness of a belief.
You know, you remember that beliefs can be inactive as well as active.
Yeah, well, we had discussed that last time, and unfortunately, I don't remember exactly where we ended up with that.
Yeah, well,
Uh, you know, I
yeah,
that's interesting. So the awareness of a belief is part of your subjective experience. Hmm. The awareness of a belief. The awareness of a belief. Um,
while you're thinking, can I be excused for a minute?
sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm back.
Okay. Can you see me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think I had the same objection to that I had last time, which is you don't you can't you don't know what that is. I don't think you can say there are active and inactive beliefs. I think you can say that you have a belief when it's active, but to say it's when it's inactive, it's still a belief. You don't know what it is because you're not aware of it. No one's aware of it.
Okay.
I
Well,
think it's a stretch.
so that's a real basic difference that we still have regarding belief. Apparently, I think we get to the point where you agree, and then uh, later you're no longer agreeing, and that the same issue is present. Uh,
Yeah.
like
I don't remember
Can I
I
clarify?
remember us talking about this last time, and we had come to agreement that wasn't the case, but I'm sorry, clarify, sure.
We had come to the agreement, what?
Um, I thought that I had argued successfully last time that um, it was inappropriate to call an inactive belief a belief. If you remember, I had argued for the
Yeah.
idea that there was enough difference between those two situations, a belief that is active and a belief that is inactive, that it was inappropriate to call them both beliefs.
Okay, well, I disagree with that. Um, I think we have
Okay.
I think we have many beliefs that we're not currently aware of, thinking about, making use of, and so forth. But under the appropriate circumstances, uh, the, those beliefs will manifest themselves. So,
Why do you say they're beliefs but they are inactive?
yeah, okay. I, I don't know how wise it is to go back to the simplest example that uh, we're using,
Yeah.
but I'll do that. Um, we have a rat in a cage, and then we have a maze, and in the maze, we put food to the right, um, and we put the rat in the maze. And over a period of time, what happens is the rat turns to the right more frequently. And one way of characterizing that is saying that the rat now believes that in the maze, food will be to the right. Okay, we take the rat and put it back in its cage, and it runs around. We don't observe anything unusual about its behavior. Only when we put the rat in the maze do we see that that belief has been acquired. So the belief, the rat still has that belief, uh, but it's inactive. Okay, take a little bit more advanced example. Um, I I know that you have certain beliefs um, that are inactive right now, but could be
Mhm.
activated easily. Uh, and we can do that right now. Right now, as I'm speaking, the belief is not active. But when I ask you where you went to high school, uh, you now respond with your belief that you went to high school at such and such a place. So the belief was there. I knew it was there. We have all sorts of beliefs that uh, that are not manifesting themselves by being active in some way.
I would argue the possibility that several things. One is that when you say to me, well, the argument that I can prove that you have a belief, an inactive belief, because when you remember it, you say, I believe that I went to high school. That is an inference you're making that simply because, well, let me ask you, maybe I think I might be understanding. Let me try to understand what you're saying. When a belief is inactive, does an inactive belief have the same attributes as an active belief?
What do you mean by attribute?
Can I act on an inactive belief? So if a belief is inactive, can it influence me?
If you do, the belief is active.
Right. Well, that's my point. I think that it's just like the idea of the unconscious. The unconscious is not a thing. There is no such thing as an inactive belief. It simply refers to a belief that you're not conscious of. It's like the unconscious doesn't refer to anything. It just means it's your imagination of what things are like when you're not conscious.
You're saying that when I asked you and the answer came to your mind, that was a belief, but that a few moments earlier, no such belief existed. And I would say that that's not correct. And the best way to think about that is the we have the belief that we have brains and that the brain operates in such a way as to become programmed with regard to some things. And so when we talk about the rat having learned that food is to the right, having learned is referring to a change that has occurred in the brain of the rat. And when we're talking about your belief about where you've been, it's your brain has been changed in such a way such that that can be activated at any time, including your memories and so forth. So we're talking about changes in the brain, and so I
Well,
don't.
I go ahead. You don't.
I don't see a problem with that. That
Oh,
it is consistent with colloquial word use to speak in.
and you think those that colloquial word use is appropriate for the subjects at hand that we're discussing?
Yes.
I think that to character, I brought this up before. to characterize a belief as a change in the brain brings up the problem of what point in time you're comparing it to. So I would agree that when the belief is first adopted, there's a change in the brain. But subsequent to that, I would argue there is no change in the brain because the belief is already been formed.
Okay, but it's the change that you've already referred to that I'm referring to. So
The change, how so?
your belief is your changed brain such that it responds in one particular way as opposed to another.
But change from what state? If for example, with regards to the rat, if the rat goes to the left to find the food, then starts making turn to the right to find the food, and then keeps going to the right, you can say there's been a change in his brain.
Right.
He used to go left, now he goes right. Okay. But what about if you give that rat to another researcher, and that researcher puts him in the same maze, and the rat's always going to the right? Would that researcher be aware that there was a change in the rat's brain?
You would make the assumption.
I would say no.
You would make the assumption that the rat had learned something that means a change in the brain.
What if the rat always went right and never went left? I mean, what if he was born, he just always went right? Would there be a change in the brain?
That would not be an example of what we're talking about. And it's also something that would not be likely to occur. But that may be non-relevant.
Well, I can see what you're saying. But I definitely think that a more salient point you're making was, I think, a good one. And I think it has some validity to it. The idea of, if I object to the idea that you have inactive beliefs, then how do I explain that you can ask me a question, I can answer by saying, yes, I believe that I went to high school, in such a town. At first glance, when I first consider that, I have like some objections to it. What makes that a belief is my judgment in the moment of what I'm remembering. If you ask me,
that's a different meaning of the word. That's a different definition of belief.
Well, I gave it's the one I proposed before. If you ask me, what high school did you go to when you were 17 years old? I say, I believe I went to Calhoun High School. For you to then argue, well, you had that belief, but it was inactive. I can argue that I had a memory of going to a certain high school that I recalled, and I believed that memory was accurate. Belief is something, to believe in something is a cognitive process that happens in the moment I don't think you can have a belief that is inactive.
I don't agree, but that completely destroys the meaning of the word belief as as I have always been using it.
Maybe we're not done with belief. I thought we had last time gotten done with it. Yeah, I mean, if all right, I think actually what happened last time is that I think you had narrowed down. We had narrowed down what an inactive belief means, and I think I might have agreed to it. And I said, well, okay, in that context, you know, I could agree that there were inactive beliefs, but I don't remember specifically that happening. It's possible. I have such a bad memory. It is very difficult to say that you are aware of an entity's attributes, whether it's a belief or not in this case, when you are unaware of the entity. And that's really the core of my objection here. It's really, really difficult.
I don't follow that. Say it again.
I can describe the attributes of an entity when I'm aware of it, and I can agree that my description is valid in the sense that's what I'm experiencing. Okay. When that entity goes away, for me to still apply the same attributes to that entity that existed when I was aware of it is problematic. I don't know what that is. You know, the idea of where did you go to high school? When I say, in the moment, when I say to you, I believe I went to Calhoun High School, I can say in that moment, yes, that's a belief. But when I'm not thinking about it anymore, and I'm going about my daily business, I don't know what it is. I don't even know if it acts. I don't know. From a certain point of view, you could question, does it even exist? I don't know. I'm not aware of it at all.
It's an inactive belief. Your brain is structured, has been structured by life experience such that you have that belief which can be activated at any time.
All right, well, what about this? Well, that's kind of, might be a little bit of circular reasoning. Let's say I have a set of experiences that contradicted the idea of me going to Calhoun High School. Let's say I was diagnosed as, you know, like it's schizophrenic. I wasn't aware of it. I just realized this about me, or my mother said that I never told you this before, but you were really raised in Russia, and you lived in Russia until you're 20 years old. And then you ask me, you know, where did you go to high school? And I have this memory of going to Calhoun High School, but I now judge it to be false. Would you argue that's still a belief? It's just a false belief, right? I no longer believe, I don't believe in that idea of me going to Calhoun High School. So I would argue that the belief that I have that I went to Calhoun High School, when I'm not, is simply a memory that I recall and I judge to be true, and I say to you in the moment, I believe that. I can remember, you know, other things that may have happened to me, and say, I don't believe that, or I'm not sure about that, or yes, I believe that. But the fact of it being a belief is something that's happening it's a verb. It's something that I'm doing in the moment. It's not when it's not in my consciousness. It's memory. I don't know what it is. I guess the best way I would describe it is that it's memory.
Well, there is, in my mind, an uncertain relationship between memory and belief. Um, Maybe they are the same. Um,
Interesting.
or maybe under some
So you're considering the possibility that memory and belief are the same.
perhaps under certain circumstances, yes. I don't know.
I think that might be an interesting thing for us to discuss. We've never talked about that. I remember at one point we started to touch on the idea of what memory was, but we never got very far with that. I think the idea of the relationship between belief and memory would be an interesting one to explore next time.
Okay. There's a question also just of word usage. Well, let's see. I've kind of lost that. There's it's possible that we could call well, beliefs about what happened in the past. No, that would not be right. That would be too general. So I have a a belief that such and such happened in the past because I have a memory of um, of such and such occurring. Um, so I'm just not sure what the optimal way of differentiating between memory and belief is.
See, I think that poses a question as regards to what it helps us to understand a little bit more by reference what consciousness is. So and I would agree with it. That seems to be what's happening. That you ask me, where did you go to high school? I recall a memory, and then I judge whether that memory was accurate or not, and then I issue a judgment. I say, I believe that I went to XYZ school. One of the questions.
The major point about that was that I was saying that you had the belief even before I asked you about it, such that then it became active. So that there was such thing as all the beliefs that you have about your whole life that are inactive until they're brought into activity by virtue of the situation, like, for instance, somebody asking you a question.
Yeah, but I think that's very easily shown to be not accurate.
Gosh.
Because I think it's very easy to show, because I can have because what I believe about my past is very often influenced by experience and what's happening to me in the present. I mean, I can believe today that I went to a certain high school, and then not have any memory about the high school at all, but be convinced that by my parents and a whole bunch of other people that I lived in Russia. And if I really believed that I lived in Russia, then I would reinterpret that memory of being in high school differently, as inaccurate. I could would say to myself, I never, you know what? I used to believe that I went to high school at a certain place, but now I realize after what I experienced that that memory was wrong. And that's very easily seen even with abuse victims. You know, I believe that my father molested me when I was a kid, or my uncle molested me when I was a kid. I know that's what happened. And then, 15 years later, my mother says to me, well, I don't know if you remember this, but, your uncle died, 2 days after you were born. And then I say to myself, well, that's strange. I have this memory of my uncle molesting me, but now I realize I don't believe that anymore. It's not true. So that's an example of how experience influences how, we judge our memories to be beliefs that are accurate or inaccurate. So I don't think the idea that you have a belief and it gets stored in your mind as a belief and then you recall it is true. I think you have memory, you have experiences that get stored in your brain as memories. You recall those memories, and dependent upon what you have experienced since you last recalled that memory will decide whether or not you have the same beliefs about it. But they're memories, they're not beliefs.
Well, that's what I was referring to earlier as a problem with word usage. And your way of using words, I think, is um, not optimal. Um, and I don't know the best way uh, to get at that particular issue. I think it's common word usage. Uh, uh, where did you go to high school? Well, I believe I went to so and so, and that's my recollection, and so on. There's no problem that people have with using the word belief. Uh, 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 Ask a person, uh, well, do you have any religious beliefs? And the person will say, well, yes, I do. But they haven't said what those beliefs are. So they're aware that they have beliefs that they have not been activated to the extent of them now telling somebody else what those beliefs are. That uh, Do you think that you have any beliefs that are actually incorrect? And the person will say, yeah, sure. That doesn't mean that they have those beliefs in mind at that point. There's nothing in their minds at that point, but
No,
they're,
but yes, but they do have in mind what you're asking them about. They have in mind the idea that they have beliefs.
yeah, but they're answering the question. Uh, I'm talking about the question that I am asking them. Um, so
Right. So what I think what's happening there is that, do you have beliefs that you believe? Do you have any? Just ask somebody. Do you have any beliefs? And the person thinks about it a minute, they reflect on themselves and their past experiences, and they remember various things. But the key thing is they recall something. They recall that they have beliefs. They believe that that memory is accurate. And then they say to you, well, yes, in fact, I do have beliefs. But let's take an interesting situation. Let's take a friend that an acquaintance we both know that have in common. Let's take Tim. Do you remember Tim, who says,
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't have any beliefs. I don't really believe in anything.
That was
Okay.
coming to my mind.
This is interesting.
But that's
Right.
his
Now,
usage.
Tim's belief,
That was just
well,
his.
well, Tim's belief that he had, what?
That was just his word usage.
That was just,
Yeah, he changed uh, the word for belief, changed it to suspicion.
well, right. So let's take that for example. To state, for Tim to state the belief that he only has suspicions, okay, I would argue comes from a worldview he has.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you go back to a point in time in his life where he had a different worldview, or at some time in the future, if he adopts a different worldview, he will recall the same memories he's recalling right now when he says he only has suspicions. He'll recall the same things and the same life that he did now, but because his worldview has changed, he is going to characterize those memories as being different. Instead of characterizing them as he only has suspicions, he would now might characterize them, no, I have strong beliefs now. I always did have strong beliefs. I just never really realized it. So the idea that a belief is a static concept that goes into memory and then you recall it, I don't think is accurate. A belief is a memory that you recall that you judge whether or not it's accurate or inaccurate. If it's accurate, you say you believe in it. If it's inaccurate, then you say I don't believe in it.
That's the way you choose to use the word belief in the definition. It is not mine. And I think that is more consistent with the way people use words and so on.
Well, I think my definition of what's happening with what a belief is, in my opinion, of course, it's just my opinion, is more accurate to the sequence of events that are happening that I would argue most people would just overlook. I think most people would overlook the idea that when you ask if they believe something, they are first engaging in recall. They may not be aware that they're recalling something, but they are, I would argue. So just because that most people use the word colloquially differently, again, we had talked about the idea and the importance of using a definition of a term that fits the subject matter that we're talking about at hand. And the subject matter we're talking about at hand is a very, very technical, detailed definition of what happens when somebody says they believe something. I think it's easily demonstrated, and I just did, that to say I have a belief in something, it goes in a drawer, it remains the same, and I take it out, and it's still the same thing. It's, like I said, I think that's easily demonstrated to be not true. Maybe that's something we should talk about more next time, because this is an interesting, I think, discussion. What do you think? the difference between memory and belief, the relationship between the two.
Um, it's possibly useful, but I think there's a one basic the problem has to do with our different meanings of the word belief. And I believe that mine is more satisfactory. I cannot follow yours. Uh, to say that I can see how you would say that, well, um, a belief exists only when one is acting according to it. But that acting according to it depends upon the situation. If the person is not put in the situation, they're not going to be acting according to that belief. But that doesn't mean the belief does not exist. It does exist and will be called into action in certain situations.
But that, yeah, that doesn't follow me. That implies that the belief will remain static and will be the same as
No,
it was.
no, in no way is that a part of what I said. In fact, we know that beliefs do change over time, or memories do change over time. The brain is not static. Uh, it's there's a lot
Oh, okay.
and so
That
but
just seems to be,
there's a
honestly.
difference
Go
between
ahead.
the fact that beliefs change over time and whether or not the belief is in existence right now, even though it's not being activated by the situation.
How do you know that beliefs change over time when they are inactive? See, I have a very plausible explanation for
Well,
how beliefs change, how beliefs appear to change over time. It's really not the beliefs that are changing. It's the person that is changing over time, such that when they recall the memory, they are reinterpreting the memory differently, and it appears as if the belief has changed.
yeah, well, that's a whole different way of um, uh, conceptualizing, and I guess you could maybe do that. It's just would be atypical, and it uh, is a more complicated way of looking at things. I think
Well,
that's
I,
the simplest way.
yeah, I think it has practical benefit. I mean, I think that the idea that you have inactive beliefs kind of makes it easy for people to adopt the idea that these beliefs are kind of static and are influencing them um, kind of at all times. And I would think no, that's not what's happening. You have memories of things that happened to you,
Say it again.
and you characterize some memories as
Wait, I'm sorry. Say that again.
which part?
Uh, Beliefs, inactive beliefs influencing you over time or something like that.
Yeah. Um, I don't think the idea that we have active and inactive beliefs. Well, I should say this. I don't think the idea that there are inactive beliefs that influence us, not only do I think it's not accurate.
Wait. If they are inactive, they're not influencing us.
Well, but but if that's the case, how do you know if they're not influencing us? There is no means by which you can identify that the belief exists. So then how can you say that they exist but they're inactive?
Well, I thought that that was very clear. When you learn something, uh, there is a change that takes place in your brain, and that change will manifest itself under certain circumstances, but most of the time it will probably remain inactive, having manifesting itself in no observable way.
Yeah. See, I mean, I think, like I said before, I think that it is. A couple of this. If you adhere to the belief that there is such a thing as an inactive belief, I could ask some questions about what that means. And I think one of those questions that I could ask and even answer is that if you have a belief that's X and it goes into a draw, how do you know that belief is still X or Y or Z or something else? How do you know that's what's happening? That the idea might be the same and might change? How do you know?
Well,
if it's inactive?
you're using the word know.
How can you be confident
Well,
that's
because
what's happening?
it's consistent word usage, like for other people, like to be able to talk with other people. Um,
Yeah. I think we should talk about this more next time. What do you think? The
yeah,
idea, the relationship between memory and belief, I think is very interesting,
uh,
which I think is what we're talking about now. Would you agree?
I think what we're talking about now is you're not wanting to say that there's such thing as inactive beliefs, that it's only a belief when it's active. And I don't, and I think the brain has millions of beliefs about things, but only a few of them are active at any one particular time by virtue of the situation that the person is in. In that situation,
Right. See, I would say, I would, yeah, I understand, and now I would think that's the colloquial understanding. I would say that the brain has millions and millions of memories that a person can recall at any given time and judge whether or not that memory could be characterized as a belief. I believe in the existence of God. Tim once believed in the existence of God. He had And if you asked him, do you believe in God? He says, yes. And then he had a whole bunch of negative experiences with regard to Christianity. And 20 years later, or 10 years later, or 5 years later, somebody asked him for the first time, do you believe in God? And he recalled all his memories about God. And in that moment, based on his memories of all his experiences, he says, he changes, his belief changed. In the moment, to now say, no, I don't believe in God anymore. The memory, it was still a memory. It wasn't a belief that was kind of static in his brain somewhere. It was a memory of all of his life experiences that he recalled differently when he was 40 versus when he was 14.
Well,
that's what I argue is what's happening.
Part of what's involved here is in talking about things like belief, we can refer to individual beliefs in a fairly discrete way. In other words, talk about specific beliefs, but actually all of our beliefs are interconnected with each other in various ways. And uh, that's why we refer to belief systems. And um, so, well, let's see, what was my main point? But anyway,
Yeah,
I think that this is a very basic problem that a basic area of disagreement. You're wanting to use the word belief only for something that is actively manifesting itself at a particular point in time.
correct.
And to me, that is that kind of ruins the definition of belief, makes it
Right.
things more jumbled.
Yeah, well, I mean, a good way of describing, I think, the core difference in a very short way would be, I consider belief to be a verb, not a noun. A belief is not a thing. A belief is a verb. It's something you do, like running or walking. It's an activity you engage in.
See, I don't think that that's grammatically correct. A belief, the word belief is not a verb. Believe is a verb. Believe.
Well, yes, but you can't, when you say you have a belief in X, you are engaging in the activity of believing. So there's belief and believing. Believing is the verb. So I guess you could say, yes, I do. You could characterize, maybe, I have to think about this a little bit more. Maybe you could characterize a belief as a noun. But I think I think a more nuanced examination of what's happening there is, when you say you believe, I have a belief, what you are doing, you are engaging in the activity of believing. And I think that's a really core difference, definitely, between the two of us.
I think that that's there are problems there. In what is actually being referred to, the activity of believing or the presence of presence of a
Yeah,
belief.
yeah, and they go hand in hand, I argue. I say you cannot have a belief without engaging in the activity of believing. The idea that you can have a belief as an entity independent of the activity of believing that kind of can go in your brain somewhere, I think is not accurate.
But all of this is word usage, which is culturally defined as the result of our lifetime experience and so forth, and uh, seeing how other people use words and so on. And
Um,
so you,
yeah, I think it's more than that. I mean, I think you and I are actually talking about um, two very different ways of understanding what a belief is. One is more as an entity that has kind of existence unto itself. And I'm describing belief as a verb and an activity that has no meaning at all if you're not engaging in the activity.
yeah, and I don't
So
agree.
from a certain point of view, what I'm saying is you don't agree. Yeah, that's I know. We've been on for a while. So we've been going on 2.5 hours. You wanna call it
Yeah, we might as well.
and continue this next time?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to instead of meeting once a week for a very long period of time, would it be more beneficial for us to meet maybe twice a week for a shorter period of time?
Well, we could try that.
Okay. All right. I'll text you about it offline.
Okay.
But in lieu of that, let's still meet Friday, same time, 3:30 next time.
Yes.
All right, Bill. Have a
Okay.
good one.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
You